English translation, 571st contact Saturday, the 24th of August, 2013, 14:17 hours.
Here I am. It was a short correction work today.
Then we also have enough time to talk and answer your question that you asked me about Florina. And you probably also have other things we can discuss.
That is correct. And so I want to ask the following question. What have your linguists and scribes said about which ending should follow alle? Alle die and alle gene, whether an N is appropriate, as in alle verschiedenen Dinge, alle die verschiedenen Dinge, and alle gen verschiedenen Dinge, etc. Or is it correct that it should be without an N, for example, alle verschiedene Dinge, etc.? It is simply tiresome that differences and doubts in this respect always arise during correction work.
Our experts explain that the first version you mentioned is correct. There is no need for an N at the end, as is also the case in many other cases, as I already explained to you at the 395th official conversation on the 16th of July 2005, according to the statements of our linguists and scribes. An N ending, as it is used in many cases in the German language today, is fundamentally wrong, which we should perhaps remind you of once again with an excerpt from our conversation at that time. So if you can copy what is necessary and paste it right after my words, that will help. Then I will now come to deal with the written things that you have asked me to ask our German scribes about. A special committee was set up for this purpose, which dealt with your questions in great detail. Your statement is now as follows. Unfortunately, mistakes have been made in the German language time and again, as is also the case with the new orthography at the present time. This has also led to the mistake of adding an N ending to certain words which do not need this ending. So the N ending is partly wrong in today's German written language and therefore not universally valid. Your 3 written submissions, which you have taken from the 19th Contact Report note, Pleiadian Pleiaren Contact Reports, Volume 10, page 136, 137, and which you have handed over to me for examination, have been assessed as follows after careful examination. In the phrase die solche terroristische Verbrecher verdienen, the terroristische is not written as terroristischen. Continue with Hast du noch irgendwelche fehlerhafte Dinge gefunden, but the fehlerhafte does not have an N at the end. With the following sentence, Noch ist es aber eine Minorität, die noch kein Großkraft hat, doch wenn dies Minderheit wächst. Dann wird es eines Tages keine verbrecherische, staatsmächtige und keine Religionisten mehr geben. Is not with an N at the end for verbrecherische, as is also the case with the word Ausgartet in the sentence. At all times, such Ausgartet incidents have been hushed up. This also applies to the words unbewusste. Bewusste und menschliche in the part of the sentence was gleichermaßen aber auch bei Tieren und Pflanzen geschieht, die für solche unbewusste oder bewusste menschliche Impuls empfänglich sind. In the next part of the sentence, the same applies, that there is no an end. Und da nun alle aufenwesen irgendwelche alterkomliche Faktoren menschlicher Prägung in sich tragen. Also in the sentence part, solches tun, that is to say, solche operative Eingriff am Körper sowie am Gesicht, does not need an N at the end in operative, just as not in these phrases, und solche wasserspeichernde Gesteins, und Erdschichten auf solche wasserspeichernde Schichten zu stoßen. Wasserspeichernde does not require an N at the end, nor does starke and magnetisch in the sentence, sondern irgendwelche speziell starke magnetische Auswirkungen zeitigen kann, etc. Our experts in German, writing and language find it very unfortunate that the spelling mistakes you mentioned appear in the German language, because these are double reproductions. In fact, they explain, and I shall explain this in a simple and understandable language, that it is not the case that a plural noun also requires a plural word in front of it. and whether there is a plural word in front of it can be very easily defined by listening to the spoken sentence. So you should not use the wrong spellings, but orient yourselves according to your reason and hearing.
Of course I will. Then another question regarding the following reader's question, which I also asked Florina to pass on to you so that you can clarify the whole thing. Is there anything you know, or have you found out anything about this question?
Reader's questions. Hello, everybody. A few days ago, an acquaintance approached me and told me in confidence about an experience she had in 1991, in the month of August, when she and a friend were on a country road near Göppingen, near Stuttgart, between 3 and 4 hours in the morning. On their way home from a discotheque, both of them drove in their car under a starry sky through a wooded area on a country road near Göppingen at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly, a blue-silver pulsating unknown object appeared above the car, which had the shape of a disc on which a dome was installed. The object was about 7-8 meters in size and flew over the car at a height of about 30-50 meters. Both felt the situation to be unreal, threatening, and stopped in a forest car park. As if paralyzed with fear, they closed the car doors from the inside and watched the pulsating flying object, which also flew back and forth over the car after 20 minutes, and then shot transparent silver-blue light arrows into the forest. The light arrows were like the light of a stroboscope lamp. My acquaintance assured me that she had neither drunk alcohol nor taken drugs. Since this encounter, she only told this sighting to one of her friends and her husband. In vain, she searched in various UFO databases that are publicly accessible through the internet. Again and again, she has to think back to this encounter and asks herself to this day what this object wanted from her and her friend. After about 40 to 50 unbearable minutes, the flying object disappeared just as silently as it had come. Although I also do not expect that the Figu or the Plejaren know anything about this encounter or can be found out, I see it as a last attempt to help my friend in this matter. Best regards, Uwe Dvorschak, Germany.
From our inspection records of our own activities, it appears that no activities took place in the area in July, August, and September 1991. I also cannot say what the object in question was. But it seems to me, if the event really happened as described, that it could only have been a flying apparatus belonging to one of the 4 groups unknown to us.
Then that is also settled. Bernadette told me that she already has 250 pages of the 13th volume of the Pleiadian Plejaren Contact Reports.
That is gratifying. But when will the 12th volume appear? It would be time for this to be published as well.
That will probably be in spring or summer 2014. As far as I know, Bernadette recently put it in the correction.
Very good.
See here, this question, taken from Michael Horn's list, which I am also going to ask Christian to see what he thinks. Maybe he knows what it refers to or where it comes from. Although I can answer it, I would also be happy if you could give your opinion. For my part, I would like to give the following answer.
Since Plato's philosophical Platonic love teaching, the human beings understand it as a love of 2 human beings for each other, which should be without any sexual interests, and which should only be expressed in thoughts and feelings of a strong connection and mutual affection. So Plato's love is called a love without sexual fulfillment, claiming that non-sexual love is much more commonplace than it generally appears. A claim which, in my opinion, corresponds to a lie because the human being, man or woman, is affected by erotic impulses, also in so-called close and deep friendships, whether they are of the opposite sex or of the same sex. If human beings, again in my opinion, also cultivate a so-called Platonic love, then in a very close, deep friendship it can only be a one-sided, unrequited and unfulfilled love, be it between man and woman, woman and woman, or man and man. So a Platonic love can be nothing more than an illusion and a rapture without hand and foot. The whole thing is based on a Platonic philosophical impossibility, whose motives Plato probably sought in a spiritualized love and in ascetic ideals, which were completely unworldly and still are, and will remain so today. Plato himself did not have the slightest idea of his Platonic theory of love in his time, because he only talked about it, as Sfath once explained to me. Unfortunately, this philosophical impossibility was also taken over thoughtlessly by religions, sects, and various other ideologies. Platonic love is a form of love that has been named after the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, 428, 427, 347 before Emmanuel, since the Renaissance. The whole thing is based on a philosophical theory which is based on a, in my opinion, false foundation of a friendly love which seems utopian to me in its aspiration, whereby the advocates of this false philosophical thesis refer to the untenable philosophical conception and explanation of Plato. In modern usage, however, the term Platonic love has not only a meaning, but also secondary meanings that have little or nothing to do with Plato's original concept of philosophy. Plato saw love eros as a striving of the human beings in love, which should always lead him from the particular to the general and from the isolated to the comprehensive. And according to Plato's theory, this should happen when the human being in love appears or wants to become a philosopher, so that he or she cultivates love in the manner described by Plato. If the human being in the sense of Plato consciously chooses a philosophical path, then this path should lead him to higher and higher knowledge. In this way, Plato taught, the erotic urge is directed more and more towards more general, higher, more comprehensive, and therefore more rewarding values in the course of a gradual process of knowledge. By this he meant conscious ethical forms and values. In this philosophical teaching, if it is to be considered as such, the most general reality that can be achieved in this way, the most worthy and valuable thing that Plato defined as the beautiful thing in itself, is ultimately revealed. If, according to Plato's philosophical theory, this goal is reached, then the human being's search for love should end there. And this is because it is only at this goal that the loving human being finds the perfect fulfillment of his striving. If the philosophical Platonic love is considered more closely in modern usage, it is the expression of a close friendship in which the persons who are friends are not supposed to have any sexual interest in each other. However, the term Platonic love is also used for a potentially erotic relationship in which the human being voluntarily or as a result of certain circumstances renounces or has to renounce sexual fulfillment. In this case, it is not a question of philosophical justification, motivation, or objective, but only of renunciation as such. In fact, very often there is no philosophical justification at all, but usually pure reason, pure understanding, decency, and integrity. On the other hand, however, there may also be a reason for this in the way that, firstly, the ability for sexual activity is simply lacking. Secondly, because there is no opportunity for it. And thirdly, because the beloved person does not consent to sexual intercourse. In my opinion, Platonic love, even if it is related to a very close friendship, is based on a pure illusion, because in the case of a very close friendship, both the woman and the man have almost inevitably erotic feelings for each other in their thoughts and feelings. So this is really to be understood in the case of very close and deep friendship relationships, which go far beyond normal and everyday interpersonal friendships, which cannot necessarily be measured by the same standard of eroticism as so-called everyday friendships. Even in the case of everyday, Normal, open friendships which do not fall into the realm of very close and deep friendship. Erotic impulses are not necessarily excluded under certain circumstances, because the human being's sexual drive is quite naturally predetermined and cannot simply be denied. Even if many human beings deny this fact with regard to their own personality, and therefore say the untruth about it.
Then here is the question.
How can we understand having mutual sex with a friend without procreation and without aiming to a union love and still be talking about platonic love?
What you say is absolutely correct, and that I should say something in addition from our Plejaren point of view is something I would like to do with pleasure, whereby in this regard I would of course like to express our Plejaren insights, which are not only valid for us Plejaren, but universally and thus also for Earth humans. Platonic love, as it is generally understood by Earth humans, is illusory and cannot be translated into reality. Because very close and deep intersex friendships, according to Platonic philosophy, are problematic in every respect and not free of eroticism, and are also contrary to nature. On the contrary, there is also genuine open friendship between men and women, as well as between women and men and men. But the same rules sometimes apply to eroticism in this respect, as well as to erotic impulses. In such genuine and open friendships, however, different conditions prevail than in much closer and deeper friendships, which are understood to be platonic friendships. Because in genuine open friendships, there is a respectful and often shy distance between the human beings, which disappears when the friendship is very close and deep. In close friendships, if these are considered platonic according to Plato, eroticism is therefore inevitable and always more or less always present, even if this is only in thoughts and feelings, in dreams or daydreams and imaginations as well as wishes. So there is always the lurking fact of situations where a so-called close platonic friendship suddenly turns into a sexual love, be it effective, in terms of thought and emotion, as a result of dreaming, imagining or desires and fantasies, etc. in any case. However, this already corresponds to a breach of the Platonic principle as misunderstood by Earth humans, because they understand Platonic love to be a love of friendship without sexual acts. Platonic love in the sense of Earth humans therefore corresponds to a pure utopia. The reason for this is the erotic ulterior motives, ideas and desires which are not only related to men but also to women, whereby both sexes assume romantic thoughts and feelings, which are decisive factors in the game of sexual ideas and desires, etc. If this is disputed, however, then it is either that a man or woman wants to present himself or herself more pure and better than the truth, and is therefore lying, or the truth about his or her own erotic impulses is suppressed and not acknowledged, which is also a lie. According to our ancient knowledge, which is also confirmed again and again today in all our federal areas, women and men of all ages judge independently of each other the fact that the erotic attraction itself consists in every good, pure, deep, and close friendship relationship. In all relationships oriented towards forms of friendship, it is also clearly evident that, as a rule, it is not a certain attractiveness of the human beings that is the main focus, but the relationship in terms of the love connection. Women and men are equally attracted to their good friends and girlfriends and feel romantically and erotically desirable to each other. Other relationships with fellow human beings also play a role, depending on whether they are peaceful, offensive, alienating, or crisis-ridden. There are also many reasons in the evolution of consciousness, as well as in true knowledge and wisdom. It follows that, in practice, sexual attraction between the sexes is an undeniable fact of life, except in the case of misogyny, which tends to be based on hatred, but which may not prevent the appearance of sexual impulses which are also given room to develop, despite the hatred. So it is a fact that eroticism is always present more or less as wishful thinking feelings. and sexual impulses of all kinds cannot be avoided even in the case of a close and so-called platonic and long-standing friendship. This is the same with us. Therefore, erotic relationships can also be cultivated in an honorable way in pure, close, and long-lasting friendships, without the need for a real marriage alliance between two human beings, be it between woman and man, or woman and woman. It is natural for a man to be focused on grasping a possible sexual opportunity because he is naturally reproductively oriented. The women, on the other hand, are naturally conceptive beings who are equally classified as men with regard to erotic impulses. The woman is, however, somewhat more selective than the man with regard to her sex partners, which is due to evolutionary biology on the one hand, and also to her greater sensitivity, although the man is less sensitive to this. From the fact that the erotic impulses between the two sexes are lived out, it follows that the respective genus is preserved. However, the human being, who is evolutionarily much more highly developed than any animal or creature form, and who also has a conscious life of consciousness, thus acts consciously and no longer in pure form instinctively like the animals and the creatures. This also enables him to cultivate erotic thoughts and feelings, and to control the corresponding impulses according to his own needs and will, and also to live them out, without the need to procreate offspring. So he can pursue his sexual life out of pure lust and pleasure in the matter, as well as with regard to the sexual urge, which, if everything is correct, is not detrimental to him, but on the contrary gives him psychophysical satisfaction and health. If man and woman are considered in relation to polygamy, as is the case with us Plejaren, and also in various ways with earth humans and peoples of other worlds, then a man can mate with several women for procreation, whereas a woman can normally be mated with only one man. This is our justification for our polygamy in the way that a man can lead matrimonial alliances with several women, whereby we act in accordance with the creational natural laws and recommendations. Although Plato coined the term Platonic love with his name, he himself was absolutely not inclined to abstinence. The ancient Greek philosopher never cultivated and never advocated a purely spiritual love without sexuality, because he was absolutely not prudish with regard to erotic adventures. Rather, he had set himself a middle course in that he taught moderation and thus good morals, in addition to an appropriate and controlled sexual life. This was not usual in his time, because the excessive sexual degeneration in Greece was uncontrolled, and as a result the whole thing was repulsive to some human beings, as it was at all times and is also the case today. So it was only natural that Plato, as a philosopher, took up the whole thing, and did so in ignorance of the naturally predetermined and instinctive sexual impulses of the human beings of both sexes, and conceived of an ideal form of love, precisely in terms of a clean friendship, separate from the sexual, but which could never last and therefore remained pure theory. Basically, with this form of love, he wanted to avoid that the human beings would become completely over-exuberant in the sexual field, or that the sexual life would be avoided altogether. If everything is considered carefully in this way, then for Plato, erotic passion was a conscious force for self-discovery, and love itself an all-round creative force that could bring forth many good and positive things among the human beings. A platonic friendship, if it is actually considered and wants to be enforced, can in principle be extremely burdensome for good and positive human relationships, because negative effects, as well as disadvantages in relation to an intergender friendship, can appear when this kind of friendly love relationship gets out of control. This must be counteracted by providing insight into the other person's world of thought and friendships when necessary, in order to create clear fronts and to deal with everything in a correct and righteous manner. If thoughts and feelings and other impulses of an erotic nature come to light, which cannot be controlled or acted out, then the attraction between the sexes is extremely hindering for a friendship. It is also a fact that the more and more intensely a human being is attracted to the other, the more erotic impulses arise in him, which make him more and more dissatisfied with the friendship, which ultimately breaks down if the impulses are not followed.
Thanks. That helps me, because I think that I am also giving both my explanations and yours in answer to the second question. But now a question about Earth and the other planets in the Sol system, because some of them have rings. I am interested in whether you know whether the Earth could also have had such a ring like Saturn, etc.
That was indeed the case about 40 million years ago, and such a ring was formed by two smaller and one larger celestial body, which came from the outermost Sol range and drifted towards Earth. As they approached Earth, they were destroyed, forming a ring around the Earth's equator at an altitude of several thousand kilometers.
How strong was this ring, and how did you even find out about it? That would interest me. When I think of the earthly scientific research that is done in such things, however, the results are usually based on assumptions and suppositions.
Our investigations in this regard are based on time travel into the distant past of the Earth, where research was carried out and effective results were obtained that corresponded to the reality of events.
Is the question still open how strong this ring was?
It was only a weak and thin ring formation, because the mass of the destroyed celestial bodies was only small and could also only be seen from Earth like a diffuse haze.
And why does this ring around the Earth no longer exist?
Partly it evaporated again very strongly in the course of millions of years. On the one hand, because two large celestial bodies passing close to the Earth took a lot of the ring matter with them. But on the other hand, the attraction of the sun also played a major role, which drove the ring matter away again. About 14 million years ago, the remaining ring matter finally evaporated, because it was attracted by the moon and the Earth itself, and was absorbed by these two bodies.
Thanks. That is all the questions I have.
Then, in a private conversation, I would like to turn to a few things that are of interest to me.
Of course.